for everybody to be aware, this will be live streamed. So councillors will be using their iPads. I won't be, but many will be using their iPads for reading their materials. So yes, for those viewing from home, that's what my fellow councillors are doing. Could I please have an opening karakia from Henry?
Tere te mihi ki a koe te siamana tātou ko taumau nei tēnei wā. E noi tātou. Kia tau te mauri o te wānaka ki runga ki tēnei huiwhinga tangata. Kia tūtaki ai mātou, whainga katoa, haumi e, hui e, tāi ki e. Kia ra tātou.
Thank you, Henry. Right, so Zoom attendees, I don't think there is anyone, no one's attending via Zoom. Thank you, and so then we'll just move to apologies. We've got apologies from Councillor Lawson.
Apologies from Councillor Lawson, but she did ask to come in via Zoom.
So she is coming in.
Oh, thank you very much. Okay.
Thank you. And there have been apologies from Jonathan Stockley and also Marcus. Has he actually gone? Yes. Yeah, he has gone, yeah. And Marcus was also an apology to me earlier today. So, and I've got a leave of absence from Henry, is that correct? For the 18th and 19th of May?
That's correct.
Yeah. Is there any others? Yes.
Yes, leave of absence from the 23rd of this month to the 7th of June, please.
Thank you. Anybody else? Happy to move. Thank you. All in favour?
Aye.
Aye. Seconded by Councillor Sholem. Thank you. Right, confirmation of the previous minutes.
Mr. Chair, could we do conflict of interest, please?
Sure. I was going to take them as they arise, but if you're happy to raise your conflict.
Hawke's Bay Regional Sports Park, along with my colleagues.
One.
Henry and Owen.
Two. Thank you. Anybody else got any for any of the other agenda items? No, kapai. Thank you. Right, confirmation of minutes. I'm happy to move from chair and seconded by Councillor Redstone. All in favour? Aye. Great, thank you. Now, just before I move on to the next agenda item, just a reminder, we will be moving to our council meeting at 3 p.m. So we have 2 hours to get through the agenda papers, and that includes some presentations that we have today as well. So just a reminder on that. And as we move into item 5, I'd like to welcome the chair of the Hawke's Bay Airport, Wendy Harvey, and the chief executive, Rob Stratford, to come and present. There are 4 attachments to work our way through. So please come forward. Bruce, you're going to start?
I'll just introduce very briefly. So the 4 attachments that you have, so part of good practice from a council controlled organisation perspective for council is to issue a letter of expectation to the board. We did that earlier this year, and there's a response there from the board back. The draft statement of intent is attached, and also the half-year report to the 31st of December. So I'll hand over to the Chair Wendy.
Tēnā koutou katoa. Thank you for the opportunity to present to you today. It seems like a lifetime since we were here at the end of last year presenting to you, along with my colleague, our Chief Executive, Rob Stratford. I say that because obviously we've all been through Cyclone Gabrielle since then, and at the time that we presented to you our draft SOI happened to be due the draft was due the week of the cyclone. And so knowing that there was the potential, not so much the airport, I have to say the airport stood up particularly well during the cyclone and was able to respond really effectively to the demands placed upon it. But what we saw was that the impact on the region may well flow through into our SOI framework. And so we ask that you indulge us in the board reviewing that post the immediacy of the cyclone and determining whether our, not so much the strategy, but more the priorities and the phasing of our budget within those priorities remain the same. And we took the opportunity to do that in April. So what I'm going to do now is hand over to Rob, and he's going to quickly take you through the mid-year results and give you a flavour of where we're tracking, which in some ways feels a bit humbling in the sense that the impact of the cyclone has actually had a huge impact in terms of our passenger numbers. They have skyrocketed. So yeah, I'll let Rob take you through it, and then we can talk a little bit more about what that means in terms of the SOI going forward.
Thanks, Wendy, and kia ora, and welcome everyone. And it's lovely to see you all again. So just starting off, some of the key highlights in the last 6 months included obviously the opening of our forecourt, and we had a lovely, very early start to the day. It was quite a chilly morning, but it was a very good event. Zero harm to staff, contracts and tenants continues, and this is a real focus for the airport. We worked very hard on that particular metric. As Wendy's just outlined, the financial performance has been very, very strong, both in terms of passenger numbers, revenue, our EBITDA, which is how we measure our cash flow into the business, and indeed the net profit after tax. And it looks on current numbers that this position will continue. We see loadings on aircraft that are incredibly high, around 94%, and Air New Zealand isn't able to give us all the aircraft we need, and that's what's driving up the loadings. And this is making it really challenging for them if there is a delay or some form of departure problem. They then have the problem of placing those people on additional aircraft. So it becomes a real problem. But financially, from the airport's point of view, we're going really strongly. One of the other major highlights is indeed the carbon accreditation, this 4+ airport accreditation that Hawke's Bay received. Now, we're the only airport in Australia and New Zealand to have that accreditation, which goes to show we continue to punch way above our weight here in Hawke's Bay, which is really wonderful. As Wendy noted, the airport was fully operational throughout the cyclone, and we worked hard to assist people coming into the airport to charge devices, to connect with loved ones and talk to people using the Wi-Fi. And it did stress us out a little bit in those 3 or 4 days, but it was lovely to have the airport open for that facility. So we're really quite proud of that. And I guess the focus now for us is to try and develop some new routes within the Hawke's Bay region that'll assist the recovery of the region more generally. So looking at those passenger numbers, you can see that that light blue line has quite a steep incline going up to the right, and that's a 12-month weighted average number. And you can see March was a very record high for us. It's the second highest number of passengers that went through the terminal since the beginning of the airport. The last number that actually just slightly exceeded that was in 2019 in March also, with something like 9,000 passengers from Jetstar went through the terminal. So that's a very big number, and April is much, much stronger than we would normally see for April. And as I mentioned before, capacity is incredibly strong, and we're seeing to see that not only are there people coming into the region to assist with the recovery, so engineers, insurance assessors and consultants, but there also is a strong propensity for people to travel. So that's nice to have that. So in terms of those key numbers like revenue, our operating expenditure, our net profit, the little graph that's encircled by the dotted line shows you, the first one shows you where we are at the end of the 6 months, and the second one is our estimate for the end of the year. So we're looking at a pretty significant revenue of in excess of 10 million. We'll have an EBITDA of certainly over 8 million, so that's net cash into the business, and our net profit for the full year should be around about 2 million, plus a little bit more.
Okay.
Over to you now, Wendy.
Okay, thanks, Rob. So the key thing, I'm not going to go through this bullet point by bullet point, but the key thing about this slide, what it says is that when the board sat down with our management team to review the impact of the cyclone on the business and its longer term planning, strategically we still are committed to the strategy that you will see going through the SOI. So we still very much view ourselves as the gateway to the region. We still are focused on being able to accommodate up to 1 million passengers by 2030. We still have a commitment to diversification away from the heavy reliance that we have on aeronautically based revenue. And we still, as our accreditation shows, have got an absolute commitment to underpinning all we do with sustainability in mind. But what the events of the 14th of February showed us is that we do need to be confident in our ability to act as an emergency responder or an emergency support vehicle in the event of emergency. As I indicated, one of the things that you may have seen in the media recently that we have focused on moving forward or prioritising our CapEx to have a look at a second access way into the airport at the northern end of the airport. So for those of you who know where we were at about 8 or 9 years ago, around about where the old entrance was to the airport. The reason why we want to move and prioritise on that project is because it has become abundantly clear to the board that we got lucky during Gabrielle. We got lucky that Watchman Road was not compromised, which meant that our people could get in and operate and do what they needed to do. It meant that the people of, in particular, Napier, because obviously we were that side of the river, could access the airport, as Rob said, for communications. On that Wednesday alone, we had 1,600 people in the terminal. And it also meant, really importantly, that those coming into the region, so the military, police, first responders, suppliers and so on, could get out of the airport. But if Watchman Road had been compromised, we would have been incredibly challenged, if not significantly limited, in our ability to meet our obligations as an emergency responder. So we are going to prioritise in terms of our CapEx planning this year, the second roundabout, which isn't as evident in the SOI. The other thing that we're also looking at is there are some issues, I think, around zoning and looking at, in terms of the business park, those businesses that have expressed an interest in coming to the business park. We think that there is some tidy up work needed to be done, and we have already been working on this in terms of the Napier district plan. We've also, I think, and if you've been there recently, you'll know, we're experiencing, because of those increased passenger numbers, heavy demand on our parking, and also in terms of rental car activities. So what we're seeing is in the car park, if you're there on a Wednesday, it's a little bit like parking roulette. We have Bill, our ambassador, who will find you a spot, but it's not satisfactory on an ongoing basis. And also the rental car companies that operate from the airport are suggesting that they will have expansion requirements going forward. We know that in terms of those numbers, there is a peak that came directly as a result of the cyclone, so that 67,000 was way out of whack with where the rest of the country is experiencing passenger numbers. But even in the last month, we're still sitting at 58,000 passengers. And you may or may not recall, but last year we were looking at a steady increase from about 43,000 passengers, which was fairly consistent with what other regional airports were experiencing in terms of passenger numbers. We know that in terms of passenger behaviour, that there's this concept called It's known as revenge travel. So in terms of COVID, there's been a high degree of discretionary spend on travel. We suspect that will ease off quite considerably as economic conditions change. And we also know that as the roads are opening up around the region, the number of people that will choose to use air travel as opposed to going back to the road, that will obviously bring the number down. But ultimately, we know that actually we're still tracking at a fairly reasonable increase year on year. And that will be reflected through in the SOI. And at this point, from the draft that you've received, we're probably looking to move the passenger numbers that we were forecasting for this year ahead by 12 months. We just need to do a little bit more work around that, just to shore up on what those passenger numbers that drive everything else from. The other thing that we were also really mindful of, and it's particularly in terms of our CapEx, is that we were already struggling to some extent to engage credible contract resource to do the work that we need to have done in terms of the apron and some of the key projects that we have in terms of the airport layout. That is only going to be compounded by the impact of the cyclone and the demands and priorities that will be placed on limited resource. So if we can just move to the final slide. So what I'm signalling to you is that there will be a slight change to the SOI that we presented to you previously. The strategic pillars, the core areas of focus being diversification, the solar park and so on, they will all still be there. But what we are doing is making sure that on a business as usual basis, we have the ability to accommodate the passenger numbers that we are anticipating, meet the demands that we have in terms of car parking and service for our rental car agencies, and obviously acknowledging that you can put whatever number you like in your CapEx, but you still have to actually get that delivered during the year. So look, I said I'd keep it brief. I think we've covered off the key areas that we want to signal change, but happy to take any questions that you may have for us.
Thank you. Thanks, Wendy and Rob. Just a comment from me would be that we have gone through some challenging times since February 13, 14, and to see some good news from one of our shared entities is actually really fantastic, not only from a fiscal perspective and that there's a profit, which is great, but also the role that you had played during the cyclone, and then also to get the carbon accreditations as well is fantastic. So on behalf of the council, I'd just like to thank you for that, and just open it up to questions. And
Thank you, Chair. Congratulations on the level 4 carbon accreditation. I'm just curious about something, and I'm making an assumption here that flights and cars don't impact on that at all.
Certainly Air New Zealand's impact on it doesn't currently, but I think in the future it will, but currently it doesn't. And in terms of cars, yes, in terms of the footprint we have as an airport, they are all monitored, but obviously our passenger footprint isn't. But all the tenants and employees are measured. So there's a record of how many times I travel to the airport every day and what vehicle I use and how far it is. So we measure that carbon footprint.
Thank you. Yeah, I was just curious because I thought surely air flight is, one of the things that exacerbates that. So, yeah.
If I might add to that, Councillor Redstone, is that I think one of the things that set our accreditation ahead of other airports is that we've actually moved into that area which others haven't yet. So we've gone beyond our own activities, and we actually had extended that to the tenants and the contractors working on the airport, which is what's taken us up that extra level.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. Yes, certainly Hawke's Bay's trauma has been a great benefit to the airport, which is interesting to see. Just a couple of quick questions. First one is, Air New Zealand put on a temporary service between Napier and Gisborne. Was it 2 return flights a day or something? You tell me that. I just wondered how that went, because you talked about new city pair connections earlier, and I've got one other question.
As a user, it went extremely well, Councillor Nixon. The success of it was extended beyond the original. So originally it was only until the end of March.
Yep.
Now it's been agreed with Air New Zealand that it would be extended through to the end of June. And the loadings at one stage, they were sitting there in the high 90s, but they're still well north of 90. The key challenge for us at present is to try and get it extended, which is one of the goals we've set ourselves, to try and get it extended beyond the June cut-off that's currently in place.
Used to happen, I won't ask that question again. The other thing is, I noticed when I went out there, you seemed to be well supplied with power from a very large generator around the back of the terminal. I didn't realise it was there until this disaster. Did that have any great impact on our carbon rating?
It certainly will do next year, because that generator ran continuously for over 2.5 weeks.
Yeah.
So that will have an impact.
Yeah, that's right. I just thought that would be the case, but I wasn't sure. That's all I need to ask. Thanks.
Thank you, Councillor Watkins.
Oh, thank you, Chair. I'll just start with a follow-up question regarding the generator. Is that fixed at ground level, that generator?
Yes, it is.
It is. Just thinking of potential flooding at any stage, any of that core infrastructure that is ground level, that's the one that's at risk. And if that's what powered you through, I mean, there might be an opportunity to look at, giving that a bit of space.
It's a good question that you raise. We have a very comprehensive drainage and pumping system on the airport, and that's why we were able to be completely dry throughout the cyclone. And I didn't mention that there was a lot of planning work that was done before the cyclone, essentially on the back of Auckland Airport's experience. So we started pumping at least a week and a half before the cyclone to lower the water table so that we could absorb any extra water that would fall through the period. So we're quite comfortable with our ability to manage the water table.
It's great.
Yeah.
Pleased to hear that. And look, just one other small observation. I did mention it the last time you were here. I couldn't see in the arrival lounges anywhere in the new terminal a welcome sign to Hawke's Bay.
Yes. That's an absolute immediacy that we are working on, and we'll have that fixed as soon as we possibly can.
Great to hear that. Thank you.
Ms. Sandra.
Kia ora. Thank you, through you, Chair. Thank you, team, for your leadership and support through Cyclone Gabrielle and the amazing result. We can be very proud as shareholders. Just two things really, and one has been covered off about the new routes that you are thinking about, and certainly Gisborne and the team from Air New Zealand send me a text about once a fortnight to say, how are you going? Do you want us to continue? And, so we kind of need to be lined up about those sort of the areas where you think that we need to be looking at, and some of the concerns from passengers that maybe I don't hear that you do. And on that front, there is the Mayor's Air New Zealand Forum in August. So we'll line ourselves up. The other thing I want to just talk about is also the Hawke's Bay Regional Transport Committee signing off on the next steps towards the entrance and roundabout on Friday, and where to from here really, and the opportunities of, rather than moving this into a regional transport plan and going through the process with Waka Kotahi, I think it's probably helpful to have a sit down and looking at a funding model actually, about how we could progress this faster rather than sitting back and waiting for priorities from everybody else. So I think that that's the opportunity for next steps. And while we've got full support of the region to progress with that work, that planning, just not sure how you see that next step working, but I think that there's the opportunity of us all looking at the funding options for moving forward rather than waiting just for Waka Kotahi.
Thank you, Ms. Sandra. I absolutely appreciate you bringing that up because that certainly from the board's perspective has to be a priority, is to try and establish a clear line of sight on funding so that we're not, further down the ranks in terms of priority. If we were to have another cyclone tomorrow and we didn't have that luck on our side, it doesn't bear thinking about. So yes, that would absolutely be the next step, is to try and ensure funding for it. Thank you. Can I just say that also just in response to your question about in the Mirror Forum, please, we'd love the opportunity to engage with you prior to you taking part in that forum, as you represent us so well there. But can I just say that that retention of that Gisborne route is a really critical piece of our, I guess it's KPI for Rob this year, to try and focus on that. The other route that we've been working on, but not with Air New Zealand or other providers, is in terms of Wairoa. And just trying to acknowledge the impact that the cyclones had on them. Yes, so those two routes logically will be the area of focus, but the reality is we can advocate and put forward the case to Air New Zealand, but it's like passenger numbers. Ultimately, we can have the facility to handle the numbers, but we can't drive those numbers if Air New Zealand aren't also willing to come to the party.
Councillor Hickey.
Kia ora, he tere he mihi kia kōrua. Hey, just a couple of things. I bumped into a pilot and his wife. Both of them are pilots. They've moved here. They're excited about coming here fresh, in the sense of being young pilots, because this was the kind of the only place in New Zealand for opportunities to build a family and be in a great airport. So I just want to acknowledge that, because these are new people coming in to be pilots. And I also have a nephew who's studying to be a pilot down in Palmerston and things like that. So it's a great opportunity. And as a user and a frequent user at the moment, it's just great. It's a really nice, clean space. And, the manaakitanga is there from staff and other, the shops and the cafes and things like that. So yeah, just want to acknowledge you on your hard work. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Councillor Hickey. I just probably is a good time as a bit of a shout out that actually the GA community are a very important part of the airport's operations, and certainly our ongoing conversations are on looking at further opportunities to expand that activity from the airport. But yeah, absolutely, thank you. We're pretty proud of the facility that we've got there now. Thank you.
Thank you, Wendy. Actually, I agree with that comment. We're pretty proud of the facility we've got there too. I'm very happy to move the recommendations and support the many positive comments that have been made, and look forward to a return on shareholders' investment on the horizon.
Thank you. And seconded by Councillor Hickey. All in favour? Moved. Thank you very much. Thank you for attending.
Thank you.
Item 6, Hawke's Bay Regional Sports Park Trust. I'd like to welcome Graham Taylor and Ryan Hamilton to the front. Yeah. Graham can see how fine-oiled machine Hastings District Council operates.
Should just have one council.
Speaker.
Kia ora koutou, ko Ryan Hamilton tōku ingoa. I'm the CEO, Chief Executive at the Mitre 10 Sports Park. I'd like to introduce Graham Taylor to my right. Graham is our acting chair. I'd also like to acknowledge three people who are no longer sitting at the table, councillors Tanya Kerr, Councillor Henry Hickey and Councillor Alan Corbin, who are trustees. And thank you all for providing us an opportunity to talk about a special place to us all, the Mitre 10 Sports Park, based here in Hastings. Before I start, and as we are in the game of parks and active recreation, I just want to acknowledge the council on an outstanding achievement last night. Active Park of the Year, Flaxmere Park, very exciting and very well deserved for the council and also for the community. I've done a lot of work and to get that spot up and running and looking as beautiful as it is. So we'll just quickly run through, and this is just a bit of an overview, and it was great to hear the airport talking about car parking, because I've got an exciting topic to talk to you about as well. So for the new councillors, I appreciate there's a handful of new councillors around the table. I thought this was a good opportunity to provide you a bit of an update on the history of the park. So the park was established back in 2006, 2007, with proceeds from the sale of the historic Nelson Park, which is now obviously retail space. We've got very close ties to council, and appreciate Bruce and his team for the support that they do, but we are a separate trust, which allows us to look at alternative ways to fund developments at the park, and it continues to allow us to grow as we are. Historically, funding of the developments have been a third, so a third from council, a third from community funding, and a third from user pays, and that's really important to us to ensure that we're not just using ratepayers' money, but we are using community funding, and also the users have some skin in the game, I guess. The Canoe Polo facility is a great example of user pays, and every time I go to the park, they've done some new development, whether it's lights or something, but that's just to get their hands dirty and develop such an outstanding space. So that's how we've kind of worked, and we are separate, but we appreciate the close partnership we have with the council. I guess, and you will all be well aware, there's two trusts on the grounds, the Regional Sports Park, which is ourselves, and our good friends, the Hawke's Bay Community Fitness Centre Trust, who we've developed a really strong working relationship with, and continue to be able to provide shared support, shared services, and the working partnership between the two of us is going really well, which is exciting. So again, for the new councillors, who are we? We're much more than a sport and recreation ground. We have 400,000 people annually. 99% of those are community users. On any given Saturday during winter, I challenge you to find a car park close to the netball courts. We've got over 3,000 tamariki coming alone on Saturday playing netball. So combine that with two rugby games, 3 football games, countless hockey games. We've got the pool, obviously. So I think back in 2006 to where we are today, the park probably has exceeded expectations, and it continues to go from strength to strength. And $100 million worth of assets, which includes the Hawke's Bay Community Fitness Centre Trust's facilities as well, kind of shows that we're much more than an all-weather track that was laid back in 08. So we're a place to call home for a wide range of things, and I've spoken a lot about the sporting side, and our sporting partners and our performance sport partners are really important to us. But I think for me, one of the exciting pieces is the community use. So if I think of sport, when we could have an athletics record, New Zealand athletics record being broken on a Saturday, and then the Wednesday following, we could have a young person from Mahora School going there and breaking or taking part in a 60-metre run, for fun there. So it is that really community-focused piece. Other events such as being able to work with Villy and Sharon from Polyactive to develop their recent Pacifica Day was a highlight, and just an amazing can-do attitude from them. Working with Tarangi at Ngāti Kahungunu to bring amazing Waitangi Day celebrations annually. Christmas in the park, again, safe, fun environment for the whole region to be able to come in and take part in. And I'm sure no one will ever forget the amazing Tamata Tini that we held a number of years ago, but even watching it this year up at Eden Park, still doesn't hold anything on the sports park a number of years ago. So today I came from the park, and we've got thousands of young people screaming, and my ears are still ringing from the Mitre 10 Tough Kids. So it just shows the real breadth of events that we hold. And as I said, it's just got a really good vibe, some really dedicated, driven people to make the park a really exciting and beautiful place that it is today. So what next? A couple of things that are kind of on the horizon. The athletics track that's laid there at the moment is the original. It has come to the end of its life, and I'm no athlete. It looks great, but it's starting to have some wear and tear. So it's a $705,000 project that it's a must-have if we want to hold events like the Potts Classic, Colgate Games. We need to replace that. So I've been working with a local provider to be able to do that. Hastings Athletics have highlighted, and East Coast North Island Athletics have highlighted the idea of installing lights. So for $600,000, we can install 4 lights, which would allow us to hold televised meets during winter or sporting events. It's a nice to have, but again, it is one of the only parts of the park that isn't being able to be used in the winter or the darker periods of the day. So again, that'd be a really nice piece, and for 1.3 million, it sounds a lot, but 1.3 mil, we'd be able to create quite a new, great facility there. Car parking and access ways, we'll talk about that in a minute, but it's a must-have. Car parking is, I've been in this role since September. I reckon 95% of the conversations I have is in regards to car parking. Or health and safety that is as a result of lack of car parking or safe access. So that's a need to have. And the hockey turf is going to have to be replaced in the next couple of years as well. And that's about $350,000, $400,000. So the Polytang guys who laid that came, and they complimented Jock, who was in the role before me, on his management of the facility. So it's testament to what the team have done to keep it up to scratch and to keep it as it is. Some of the really exciting things to highlight as well, home of the Tuis for the next couple of years. So the Hawke's Bay Tuis, our wahine, have achieved some outstanding achievements, having to play at Park Island, which is a great place as well. But now we've been able to highlight them in the Oval and bring them there and create a bit of a space for them. So really excited for that. And they're going to do some development programs, and they've got some really exciting things in the pipeline this year, which they're going to utilise the park for. Oceania Canoe Polo Championships. Canoe Polo continues to go from strength to strength, not just in Hawke's Bay, but across the region. We've got one of the best facilities in the Southern Hemisphere, so I'm told. So it's great that it's going to be highlighted in December this year with the Oceania Champs. And as I said, depending on track conditions, we've got the Colgate Games, which is an amazing event for tamariki across New Zealand to come and compete at the track. So along with that, we've got our Potts Classics and a number of other high-profile events that we'll be bringing to the park. Car parking. So I appreciate that this conversation's been held before, and there is some funding potentially available on the proviso of a merger between the Hawke's Bay Community Fitness Centre Trust and the Regional Sports Park Trust. This is some current examples and feedback that we've had from Homoana and Hastings Old School girls netball clubs around the lack of car parking and what that means to their participants. We've done some work. We're about 300 car parks short. It creates, for me, it creates a health and safety concern around the lack of car parking and the current traffic flow in the park. So what we're wanting to do is, as you're all aware, open up a new access way alongside One School Global, have some additional car parking down there, do some traffic calming, but then also by developing the new car park, it's going to be able to provide netball participants in particular a safe, viable way to access their parks. Our trust have just had a letter presented to them on behalf of the Hawke's Bay netball community, highlighting the lack of car parking and the risk and health and safety concerns that they also have. So I would love for the funding, the potential funding, to be made available because without the need for the trusts to merge, because at the end of the day, the participants of the sports are the ones that are going to miss out. And while we continue to want to work towards a solution between the two trusts, I feel like holding the car parking funding will disadvantage the community as opposed to disadvantaging us, and we'll need to continue to work through that. Future planning. So back in 2021, Hastings District Council, Sport New Zealand funded a spatial plan. It's obviously been put on the back burner a little bit as a result of the ongoing merger conversations. There's some exciting developments at the park, and again, you look around and you see the CD Cricket marquee that's being built, the CD Cricket Giants boxing facility. Development of the park is going to continue. A spatial plan will help us when we start talking about traffic flow, car parking, new builds. Spatial plan is going to help us to ensure that anything that happens in the future is done and positioned in the right place so we're not having to retrofit or try and squeeze other facilities into the park. So we're really keen to reignite that plan, take the learnings from it, and kind of kick that back into gear. So any future developments of the park or surrounding areas are best informed by a plan as opposed to this is where it's going to work as of today. So I'm sure you've got a lot of questions for Graham Taylor. So I'll end on this snapshot of the overview of the park. And again, if you just think back to 2008, there was the athletics track. I moved back to Hawke's Bay 8 years ago, and there was an athletics track in the fields and a shed in the netball courts, obviously. But to see what the park's become today is pretty amazing. And even just driving in every day, it's a pretty amazing space. And I also have another job at Sport Hawke's Bay, and everywhere I go, this place is definitely the envy of so many around the country. So I think residents probably don't really appreciate what we've got, and we're trying to do a lot of. Hopefully, you all got bombarded with an email yesterday trying to highlight some of the stuff we are doing, but we are going to start promoting it a little bit more, and we've got a video and a few other bits and pieces that we're going to start to do to highlight the park and start to promote it a bit more. So, thank you for your time.
Right, thank you, Ryan. Just a couple of things from me. You've done nearly as good a job as what Jock has done in the past in asking for additional funding for particular things. He did a fantastic job when he came before council. And in regards to the issues that you raised around parking, as a parent who goes there for netball in winter months, that it is incredibly evident, and I sort of have to take a little bit of responsibility for trying to be a little bit clever in a previous meeting to try and move a way forward for actually the ultimate outcome. which you've touched on around the partnership collaboration with the other trusts. So we do need to look at a way of unbundling that, and whether that's brought back to the next full council meeting or to the next performance and monitoring meeting is something that we need to look at. All of the documentation is there. It's just a matter of giving it, debating it and then giving it the tick of approval or not. So that's something that we need to be looking at. And so I just am quite interested in the collaboration with the other trust and what sort of status that's actually at.
I'd hate to travel all this way on the expressway and not have a chance to speak. I think it would be fair to say that the current, there's an impasse between the two trusts. The Regional Sports Park Trust is more than open and have conceded and agreed to many of the requests of the Community Fitness Trust. However, the matters within their trust are theirs to resolve, and at the moment I believe the impasse is having a detrimental effect on a number of areas that Ryan has touched on, and not only is it affecting the future governance of that facility, which we all have agreed should have one trust running it, that's not happening at the present time, and I don't know exactly what the answer is to that, but we are very open from our perspective to that occurring. The spatial plan, which Ryan has talked about for the future, is also being put on hold for that governance structure to be sorted out. Now, until the governance is done, the spatial plan, we cannot move forward. And so does the Regional Sports Park Trust move ahead in isolation, or is it better to work collaboratively together? And I think the answer is collaborative, working together. The other thing that is impacted, and I'll just say from Ryan's point of view, is Ryan was seconded from Sport Hawke's Bay because both trusts were in a position where their CEs or GMs or whatever you like to call them were finishing. And so David Nancaro has now left the room as far as the Community Fitness Trust is concerned. Jock has gone to the Regional Council and Ryan has come in as an interim for us, but neither trust or the future management cannot be resolved until the governance is resolved as well. So if I put my other hat on as chairman of Sport Hawke's Bay, I don't want to see our GM, the Sport Hawke's Bay GM, for an indefinite period working as the Regional Sports Park Trust General Manager, CE. So the impasse needs to be resolved, and I know that there's a lot of people working behind the scenes to try and resolve that, but until such time it is resolved, I think we're going to be in a hiatus and nothing's going to happen. And some of these decisions are crucial.
Thank you for the honest approach to that and response. That's very helpful for all of us in the room. Simon.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. Well, obviously the sports park has to be one of Hastings' greatest success stories. And of course we've got a big car parking problem. And so my first question, it relates to that, because as I understand, the Regional Council planned to include the sports park in their revised urban bus service. By the look on your face, you do know about that. Has it started yet? What's your expectation? What dent might it make in the need for car parking? And the other question just related to that is, and I'm a cyclist and I do a lot of cycling, it's actually not an easy place to cycle to. And so what's your thinking on that? Because that will help solve several problems, including your car parking problem. I've got another question after that, quick.
I'm actually only going to take one question.
Okay, that's
from
fine.
You. We just don't
that's
have
the one
time.
I wanted to ask.
Yeah, so I think that the addition of a bus route to the park is a necessity. That's that's been highlighted in a number of the pieces of work Sport Hawke's Bay has done around disability and inclusion, and access to the sports park has been raised around that. That's an ongoing conversation that we are continuing to have with Regional Council. No progressions as of yet. I think it will reduce some of the vehicles on site, but not in a significant enough way for it to not. We will still need additional car parking. Part of the traffic flow plan that we've done with one of the consultants is to incorporate a new bus route where they can safely come into the site, drop and pick up, and then go without causing ongoing traffic flow from there.
Lack of car parking is always a big incentive to get public transport working.
Yep. And yes, cycling to the park is a lot harder than probably would ideally be. But we do get a lot of young people cycling from St John's, as an example. We see a lot of young people cycling from local schools. So yeah.
Ms Sandra?
Oh, kia ora, thank you, through you, Chair. Thank you both for your presentation today, and having been there for the National Swimming Champs and seeing all the other activity at the park at the same time, how exciting that. I think there was 3 activities there on that Saturday. And you're absolutely right, we can't allow the needs and safety requirements of parking to be held up because we can't all agree on a way forward. So I think this is absolutely critical, and I like the thinking around where it should be, and that's a good opportunity as we move forward. Can I just take through you, Chair, an action from today, having heard the comments being made about moving forward collaboratively with both trusts. Could we have, please, a workshop first and foremost to understand where this process is at, and to understand what solutions we have to move forward and identify what the next steps could be with everybody in a room. Thank you. Councillor Dixon, sorry.
That's all right, David, I'm used to that. Look, thank you. Thank you very much for your presentation, very much appreciated. Can either of you give us an update on where the sporting codes are at financially after the cyclone? And I'm thinking about basketball, volleyball, league and all those things. What impact has the cyclone had on our local sporting codes and those that participate?
Yeah, I'll chuck my Sport Hawke's Bay cap on.
That's why I asked you.
We appreciate the impact that the cyclones had on a number of codes. Facilities in the region came off pretty lightly. We weren't overly impacted in terms of sporting facilities. I think some of the major issues were some flooding, some surface flooding, a number of trees down. But when we compare it to some of the learnings from the Christchurch earthquakes, where they had major infrastructure damage, that put sport on the hold for a while. As a result, sport was able to, if needed, get back up and running pretty quickly. It just needed to listen to the community around what they were wanting and when they were ready. So as a result, football, they pushed their season back quite significantly. Netball wanting to get up and running pretty much straight away. So whilst there was impact, the cyclone itself hasn't actually caused too much financial impact on the sporting organisations. What we are wanting to see is, and Sport Hawke's Bay was able to prioritise some funding. We gave out $150,000 to sports organisations, kura schools, for any equipment loss or any activation that they wanted to do. Sport New Zealand, after COVID, they had the Community Resilience Fund. Sport Hawke's Bay distributed $1.5 million through that fund. That money just simply isn't available. And the conversations that Sport Hawke's Bay were having with the sports codes was that money wasn't needed. That type of money wasn't needed. What they want to do was just get sport back up and running when they could. Participation is looking pretty positive. Winter sport participation is looking very positive this year. So we expect that Tamariki Rangatahi across Hawke's Bay won't be overly too impacted. So as a result, financially, the organisation should still be able to come through. We are aware, though, of issues for some of our regional sports organisations, and Sport Hawke's Bay is working alongside them. Gaming is probably one area. So our Class 4 gaming is probably one area which has taken a bit of a hit, which will flow onto some of those organisations. Basketball, as an example, very heavily reliant on Class 4 funding. If that money is not available, then that's going to cause issues down the track. So Sport Hawke's Bay is working with those organisations to try and ensure that they're financially sustainable going forward.
Thank you, Ryan. More than happy to move the recommendations, Chair.
Councillor Dixon, I'd just like to add to that, there, at the time, immediately after the cyclone, there was some issues with congestion across on the expressway. So Napier residents coming or taking children to participate at the sports park were impacted, just as Hastings residents were to get to Pettigrew Green Arena. So that congestion and the time delay did cause some issues at that time. Hopefully they'll be resolved.
Thank you, Graham.
Thank you for the presentation, and I'm happy to report that residents do have a deep appreciation for the facilities that are there. I'm one of them. My quick question, though, is around the limestone track. Is there any plan for renewal of that? Because it's quite degraded now.
There will be now.
Yeah.
We'll look into that. Yeah, we are aware there's certain pits where there's big potholes, and so yeah, that's an important piece to the puzzle for the sports park. So that will be part of our ongoing maintenance and asset management.
Fabulous, thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Dixon, I would like to add a third recommendation. And so I'll just read that out, and then if you're happy to then carry on the move. But it is actually about bringing that paper back to the table that we presented 6 weeks ago. Was it the last? Yeah. So that was around the car parking. So I've just got a C, which is to bring the sports park car parking paper to the next council meeting. And anyone like to second that? Anne, thank you. All in favour? Thank you. Sorry, and Kelly, did you?
Kia ora kōrua. Thank you for that. I was sort of just want to dwell on the car parking. Like you're saying that 300 has already been initiated to say for netball. What about the rest of the codes? Because I'll tell you now, when I go to watch my muckles play league, it's like a lolly scramble trying to get a car park, and the same as with netball. And I really feel a bit unsafe for myself driving down there and trying to look to make sure that no little people are going to run out in front of my vehicle. Kia ora.
Through you, Chair, I think we can probably address that at the next council meeting through the Chair's request for the additional resolution, because that'll bring back that report, or that item of the report, which was providing that funding for car parking and access ways into the ground. So if we can progress that, that'll help the team get ahead.
I'm not going to take any more questions. Is it a comment?
It's about the motion that you're just about to put, just some clarity.
Yep.
So I have no opposition to being brought back, but will that report include potential remedies or implications around the merger that we were trying to achieve? I understand weaving the two has created complexities for this trust, but it's still an outcome that I would like to see. So I just want to make sure that we're not putting ourselves in a situation where we can't encourage that anymore.
I think that Your Worship's request for a workshop on that topic will help elevate the understanding around the table of where that's at, and then I think if we hold the conversation up about the car parking to get that component in, it'll just add some further delays to the decision and the ability for the team to get on with some certainty of funding their planning work, even if the budget's not available until the 1st of July. at least the planning work can be undertaken with some certainty of funding. And we'll bring back the discussion on the merger as well.
I did have someone move in second and then I did move it. Does anyone like to change their mind on that? Yep. So all in favour? Against? No. Thank you. Item 7, and Aaron, would you like to come forward and present the quarterly financial report?
Good afternoon. So this is the quarter 3 financials for the year to March, and in this quarter you'll really see the impact of Cyclone Gabrielle really starting to filter through in both the revenue lines in terms of reimbursement and also in the cost lines, which you will have seen in the report that we had. Also, what we've got is some commentary around the forecast and Gabrielle, which Mr. Allen is going to take us through as well, partway through. So in terms of the actual accounting result itself, that was a deficit of close to $18 million that you can see there. The $18 million favourable in terms of that revenue line is all around that. Is all around the reimbursements for the cyclone. The two drivers mainly in that expenditure line are around again the cost feeding through and also the high depreciation, which we have been highlighting throughout the year. This graph is actually quite useful. Usually it just goes up in a dotted line, but you can actually see the impact visually on what's happened with the cyclone impact actually factored into that. So of that additional amount there, you've got around the $17-18 million worth of reimbursement. When you look at the BAU, the business as usual side of the revenue, that's about $1.2 million favourable. I just wanted to highlight that to give you an idea of what's buried in there as well. That's mainly coming from the fees and charges side of the revenue lines in standard terms. You've got the Splash Planet having a good quarter for that period. You've also got some of the property lease income coming into those lines as well. In terms of expenditure, it looks really incredibly high there with the $30-odd million worth of impact, of which $24 million is to do with the cyclone. $9 million is to do with the depreciation for the year to date as well. In terms of BAU, there's also been impacts with higher insurance costs, which are feeding through. I shouldn't imagine that they'll back off anytime soon going forward as well. That unfortunately is going to be an ongoing fact of life. And also the legal and consulting costs feeding through there as well. We were in a Bancorp meeting this morning and we were saying that, Cyclone Gabrielle's almost obliterated everything else, but we had other issues going on with higher inflation related costs and impact on contracting costs and resources as well. Whole of council capital spend is around $14.2 million behind budget. The one thing you have to remember here is that the emergency reinstatement costs that are going through and the work that's being done in transport is not going through to capital, it's going through to the expenditure lines. Hence why you see those expenditure lines being much higher. But that means, of course, that that resource is being directed at that, not necessarily all at the capital project lines. Even having said that, though, and while having said that, water's projects are still rolling along. We've got landfill now well underway with that second valley, that third valley, fourth valley, the new valley, should I say, that they're working on. And so, you know, a lot of that work is carrying on. And you can see from the previous year's line there that we're still well ahead of where we were last year as well. So I think, you know, where we're using we're using those resources relatively well in terms of operationally. I think I'll just hand over to Mr. Allen. However, just before I do hand over, I'd just like to make note that we added another dashboard sheet into your dashboard there, and that relates to the cyclone costs and gives you a bit of a breakdown of the actual costs and what the revenue reimbursements were against each of those costs. We'll be updating that on a regular basis, just to keep you abreast of that split out, so that that's being tracked as well.
Thanks, Aaron. So really just two quick slides here, just to have a bit of a conversation about the forecast to year end, and it's fundamentally different to what we were looking at when the team sat down and all the budget managers sat down and did a forecast back in beginning of February. So we've had to go back and recast how that all looked, and important that we look at it and try and break out the direct impact of the cyclone whilst it gets grey around the edges, just trying to understand how much of this is cyclone related and how much of it relates to the issues that we were having pre-cyclone around cost escalations, inflation higher than usual, higher interest rates than we'd budgeted for and the like. So there are a number of factors at play, as Aaron mentioned, prior to the cyclone. They've created some impacts. Of that $3.2 million of deficit we're terming as business as usual, you know, 700,000 of that relates to what we would ordinarily fund out of the general rate. So when we come and talk to you in September, normally with our end of year rating result, and we generally talk about a rating deficit or surplus against the general rate that we've collected rather than the targeted rate. So the balance of that business as usual deficit fits to a large degree within our target rate areas in our water supply, wastewater, and the likes, where the team are actually having to spend a lot more money on preventative and reactive maintenance than we've had in the past, or that we had budgeted to do. So that's in a large way driven that overspend. We've also, you know, we've talked about insurance costs here as well before. You know, the material damage in our underground catastrophe cover insurance policy premiums are significantly higher than what they've been in the past and what we've actually budgeted for. So that's the business as usual. So, you know, if that all played out to year end, we would have been looking at around about a $770,000 rating deficit. And in the context of the environment that we're working in, that's pretty close when you look at a $70-odd million rate take in that general rate area. With the cyclone, the cyclone has created a large number of extra costs for us to incur. A lot of it we will recover, and we've talked about this at previous meetings. Some of it we're accounting for now because we have certainty around its recovery, particularly within the Waka Kotahi space, or we've made other claims. But there's other areas where we're still in the process of reconciling the claims for NEMA around welfare and the funds that were made available around solid waste or the household waste collection process. So whilst that 13.8 million is shown there, we do have a degree of sort of comfort that there are funding sources available when we're continuing to chase those It's just that we haven't got certainty on how much at this point in time, other than the Waka Kotahi subsidy. So just looking at that, putting those two numbers together, it's a $17 million forecast deficit. But as I've talked about, there are a number of opportunities for us to source other income. So the NEMA through the welfare claims, where we've spent money supporting our community through direct welfare in relation to the response, we can make claims to NEMA on that. Now, I'm certain amongst that 2.2 million is expenditure around supporting the organisation that we can't claim on, hence a little bit of uncertainty. We've spent about just over $4 million on that household waste collection and disposal. Now, there's a fund available for that. The way the parameters have been set, it's challenging around how we can make a claim. We're certainly still going to put a claim in, and we'll work through the process on that. But at the moment, that funding is uncertain, but we'll still keep pushing on that front. On the transport local share, so very healthy subsidy from Waka Kotahi at 93% of all that we're doing. We're forecasting in these forecasts $60 million spend from the event. It includes Cyclone Hale a few weeks earlier to end of the financial year. That carries with it a $4.2 million local share that we need to try and fund. And this conversation with the Rural Community Board in a week or two. We have emergency reserves for this purpose. Generally, we don't have events of this nature that we need to support, but there is about $1 million sitting in that account that can be contributed towards this. There's a capital reserve in the rating area 2 space, and it's a conversation with the Rural Community Board around accessing those reserves to partially fund the deficit that we've got in this area. And then we can have a look at whether any loan funding is an appropriate funding tool for that $4.2 million local share. So there are some levers that we've got to pull. There's a contingency reserve as well. We'll have a conversation with you in time around how much of that gets released to fund unbudgeted expenditure in this financial year, how much we think is prudent to hold back for next financial year as well. So, if they all play out, we've got approximately about $10 million worth of offsets to go against that $17 million forecast deficit. So, a realistic expectation at year end is a deficit in the vicinity of around $6 million, half of which will probably be associated with our targeted rate accounts. And that'll get ring fenced into those areas, and we'll look at collecting that in future years. There's already a planned program of increasing targeted rates and spaces. So that will largely look after itself in time. As the general rate component, which will be potentially in the vicinity of around $3 million, which we will need to have a conversation with you around how that can be potentially funded going forward. So happy to take any questions, Chair.
Thank you, Mayor Sandra.
Kia ora, thank you, through you, Chair, and thank you, Bruce. You did highlight how much we had in the rural flood reserves and a contingency, so that was helpful. But, I just want to acknowledge the significance of the natural disaster of Cyclone Gabrielle and that, our community expects us to get on and sort this out and with our partners, central government. So, I just think that we look forward to the next month or so looking at what funding we can get in from central government and how we can manage this, but still deliver the service that our community expects us to. So that's just really a comment, Chair, really. Thank you.
Councillor Kerr.
Thank you. In support of Mayor Sandra, the rural reserves are there for the rainy day. So I'm sure the Rural Community Board will be supporting their use. On a non-cyclone comment, although Toi Toi has been impacted with COVID and cyclones, and to quote in here, they haven't yet had a clear run. Rather than discussing it now, I just ask that we could have an update on Toi Toi, how that's the managing, the operating costs, etc. Come back in a separate report, please.
Yeah, that's something that's been requested by the Chair also, something we'll have on aiming for the next performance monitoring agenda.
Councillor Scholem.
Thank you, and thank you for talking us through how the potential deficit may fall in terms of where it can be recovered from. I understand that we have policies around our debt. And so in terms of loan funding to cover such things, the 3 million, are we looking at that for the general rating component of the deficit? Are we looking at that potentially having to be future rates collection through the long-term plan, or is any component of that going to be able to be loan funded under our criteria?
So, through you, Chair, and Bruce can add, I think that when we wanted to, signal, a forecast with some uncertainty at the moment, but when we get to year end and the sets of decisions that council needs to decide, it will be a mix of levers from, reserves, contingency, and through to, future rates. And so all of that we will bring to you, and that'll be a set of choices for the council table around how those costs get absorbed.
And I'd just like to thank you for the new report you've added in outlining the cycling costs. It's really helpful, and thank you also for the report. It's a really complex beast we're looking at, and it was really well worded, and thank you for stepping us through it.
Anyone like to move the recommendations?
Happy to move.
Councillor Kerr and seconded by Mayor Sandra, all in favour? Right, thank you. Thank you, Aaron. Thanks for your work. Okay, just moving to agenda item 8, and I expect that you've read this page by page, and I've got a quiz that I'm going to have chocolate fish for the answers to.
Did you find a spelling mistake?
Sorry?
Did you find a spelling mistake?
Spelling mistake. There's one in there.
But in all seriousness, this report does take a lot of pulling together, and again, due to the nature of what has occurred over the last couple of months, we didn't have one. We had an abbreviated one in some way or form at the previous meeting. This is a more comprehensive report, which is retrospective in some sense, but it gives us an understanding of what projects are on the go. But we are reviewing how we pull together this information as well to make it easier, and really what is the purpose, because it is a lot of information to pull together from various parts of council operations. So if you have any thoughts on that, and I especially put that challenge out to chairs of particular subcommittees, because it is the information that pulls up through your committees to this performance and monitoring report. So, as I said, if there's even an executive summary and a couple of highlights and a couple of challenges type of approach or something to it, would be quite helpful to have taken into consideration. So thank you. I'll just pass over to Bruce.
Thank you, Chair. So I might, at times, I have my group manager colleagues in the room, Mr. Thu O'Shaughnessy and Ms. Dinwoody. If we do get to questions, they are here and they're champing at the bit to answer your questions. So just really quickly, I'll just, as we've done at previous meetings, just step you through the report, largely just following the strategic priorities that council has in its long-term plan. So, in regard to the economic powerhouse, key data in there around that the Hastings economy grew 3.3% over the year to December, and I think to the chair's point, some of this information does feel a little bit old, but it is around the reporting cycles that we get. Employment for residents living in the Hastings district was up 3.2% the year to December, and a lot of this information, again, as I mentioned, will be impacted by the cyclone, and the consequence of that on the information that we're receiving is quite significant. You'll have a report coming to you in next week at Strategy and Policy on the city centre strategy. We've talked about this a number of times, and there are a number of key projects that were included in that are still important, and that'll come to you in the future. We have had a number of good conversations around the city centre strategy, and that review continues. But what it has highlighted is that in the 10 years to date, a lot has been achieved. And now's a good time to do a stock take and to bit reset before we move forward again. Mr. Chair, I'm happy to take questions as they arise throughout the presentation. Just regarding housing and building consents, so house prices in Hastings fell 13% to December compared to a national drop of about 9%. And we've noticed that residential consents in Hastings have fallen quite significantly, 40% compared to 2021 and below our 3-year average for the 4th consecutive quarter. So we're certainly seeing and noticing an impact there. There have been a number of notable building consents granted over that period. So there's a new cool store in Irongate, warehouse and office space at Whakatū, office buildings, industrial workshop in Omahu Road, and a new multi-sports facility in Herewith. So they're just 4, but a number of others as well.
And Bruce, and also the regional museum storage is in as well.
That's right. And we got very good service throughout that process. Getting around, so the design and construction of road safety improvements and roundabouts has continued. So you really take this, the getting around strategic priority of councils. This is a BAU lens, and on the 14th of February, that all changed. So, but yeah, the maintenance resealing urban roads is complete. There is actually the roading team were doing a great job leading up to the cyclone around delivering on the roading program. If Craig, got anything else to add to that point?
If I may, through the chair, and it relates also to the previous item, financials. So the team have got through a lot of the maintenance and resource, particularly in the urban area, but there is some work that was not able to be done, which does relate to some of that renewal spend. So with the Higgins processing plant out of Awatoto going completely underwater, we have been unable and will be unable until next sealing season to do the asphalt surfacing. So that directly relates to Eastbourne Street, Stoffer Lodge Roundabout and Parkway Road, those areas that were failing. So they'll be just doing holding treatments on those until next sealing season. And obviously the rural network, the general reseals out there, which is the next topic, got stopped with the cyclone, with the amount of damage out there.
The rural living strategic priority area for council is obviously the area that's been most impacted by Cyclone Gabriel. And as the report details some key issues, items particularly around what happened in the East Valley, Pakawhai, for example, our isolated communities, the work that the staff did to reach out to those communities and understand what the situation was and how we could potentially respond. There's been acknowledgement of what's happened with our horticulture sector, catastrophic damage on the floodplains of the Ngāroto, Tudukuri and East Rivers, destruction of our orchards, trees, houses and infrastructure. So, that list is ongoing, it's long, and it's been quite devastating to that part of our community. And then in a rural community, rural councillors know this better than most. The loss of stock, fencing, roading, our culverts and our bridges are being significant, and that will take a long time to come right. In regard to our natural treasures strategic priority and the impact of the cyclone from a drinking water perspective or our water supply perspective, those areas of our infrastructure got off reasonably lightly, with the exception of the Whirinaki-esque and Tipahui communities. Throughout this process, the Wairaha development has continued, although delayed slightly through to mid-September. I think when we reflect back and look at what happened, the fact that the curbside rubbish collection was suspended for only 4 days was testament to the work that the team did behind the scenes, and likewise around curbside recycling. And the fact that the Omarunui landfill was impacted like it was, and the time that it took the staff to get that back up and running was an extremely good response. In relation to Hastings Alive, and I mentioned the Hastings City Centre strategy review that's being undertaken at the moment. But in addition to that, there's been more street upgrades over this period of time that we're reporting, and facade enhancements. I think through this time, and it probably hasn't been reported at a performance and monitoring committee, but we did receive a commitment of $9 million, or up to $9 million of funding from the Ministry of Cultural and Heritage Fund for the Museum Research and Archive Centre, and that continues behind the scenes. And the Heratong House deconstruction is now underway with scaffolding beginning to go up around the building. And then second to lastly, Pathways for People. Our 17 youth councillors are appointed to the 2023 Youth Council. We have 2 candidates chosen for the Mayor's Tuia program, and the Welcoming Communities Statement of Commitment was signed. Cultural events included the Diwali celebration, Punjabi Language Week, and the Hawke's Bay Ethnic Communities Tennis Ball Cricket Tournament, and the Integrated Community Hub supporting our cyclone impacted whānau has continued to provide services out into our communities. And lastly, just around enhancing where we live, on the 1st of April, we took ownership of the Tamawana Showgrounds, and the staff have been busy putting into place management and operational structures to support that. Toi Toi held a number of international shows, including Jimmy Carr in January, Proclaimers in March, and again has been affected by the events of the cyclone. And for Toi Toi, that continues the disruption around it getting a clear run at delivering its services. Unfortunately, Splash Planet had to close early due to staff shortages. And despite a rather damp summer, still experienced high numbers through the gate. Art Gallery, the exhibitions continue to be held, except for a 2-week time through the middle of the cyclone response, and likewise with the library, both those facilities, staff were redeployed to support the cyclone response. And our community centres continues to support our local communities through activities and food parcels. And I think the value of those community centres in times of need was really shown through in the cyclone response time, and then particularly out at our Flaxmere Community Centre, where the community really gathered round and supported those in need. So on that, take any questions.
Thank you. Councillor Sholem.
Thank you. And in an effort to get a chocolate fish from the chair, can I please clarify on page 9 whether the Rebel Business School is 17th to the 28th of July 2023 or 2022? Since it's hindsight reporting.
There's one coming up.
Is there? So
Yes, there
that's
is.
this year?
There is one coming up.
Okay.
And it is in July.
Okay, it's not a major. Aside
Yep.
from that, the thing that I really noticed when I was reading through this really comprehensive document, and thank you, it is valuable, but I agree with the chair, perhaps we can look at improving it further, is there's a huge amount in there that is going to require the attention of council in the medium to short term. I'm looking at things like our senior housing, I'm looking at Toi Toi and its future, and hard to project given it hasn't had a clear run without COVID or a cyclone in there. I'm looking at our aquatics, I'm looking at the desire for a youth facility, and it kind of relates to our previous item as well, which is how are we going to weave all these things together? And I know that's not a very specific question, but I'm throwing this at you, Mr. Allen, because I'm conscious that there's going to be a lot of demands in the BAU space as well as the recovery space, and I'm just interested to understand how we're going to address that on an ongoing basis in a forum like this.
That's a really good question, and something that we're conscious of and we need to work through in conversations, a number of conversations that we're going to need to have around this table, around a financial strategy going forward. Every long-term plan, we review the financial strategy that we have in place, we do a bit of a reset, we set it up to move us forward, to enable us to deliver the outcomes that we want to achieve in the long-term plan. Throw in a cyclone with the damage that we've received, we need to have that same conversation, but sooner than what we would have planned. And that's looking at a reprioritisation of spend. We're going to have significant spend rebuilding our rural roading network, And to enable that to happen within the financial constraints that we have, council's going to have to consider reprioritising investments and understanding what's really important around going forward. The ability to do all of what we thought was necessary before with an overlay of cyclone response is probably not achievable. So we will need to have those challenging conversations in the coming months.
If I may follow up. I guess the follow-up question I've got to that is, as well, and this may not be able to be answered today, is as part of that reprioritisation process, how do we identify what we best to put resource into in terms of digging into deep enough to even get budgets out of? Because I'm aware there was a huge body of work before we had a cyclone and huge aspirations for the future. And I'm just conscious that, in particular, existing resource in terms of staff resources already pulled in all directions. So will that be sort of weaved into that process as well?
I think at a management level, that's the things that we're really conscious of and need to work our way through to understand where our resources are. What are the resources, I guess first and foremost, what are the resources that we need to support the response or the recovery from the cyclone? Deploy that, understand that situation, we can stand back and reflect on what capacity we got to deliver on other activities and priorities of council. And ultimately, it's your decision, but we need to package that up at a management level and bring that back to you for decisions to be made.
Excellent. So if I may, Mr. Chair, I think that's probably something that could potentially inform what this document looks like going forward as well, is weaving that into it in some way, so that we've got an understanding of what's possible in a BAU space while we're trying to do recovery at the same time. So I'm just going to put that out there as maybe something for the future. Thank you.
Thank you. And just going back to the how in depth the report is, I hope you have noticed that in the cemeteries component of the report that Havelock North is running out of space and will be out of space within the next 6 to 8 months. So it is just something to make note of, and I just raise that because they could be things that you are asked about in the community. So yeah, just a little bit of interesting information. Ms. Sandra.
Through you, Chair, and thank you everyone for this very thorough report. And I just would like to see, Chair, if we looked at understanding the development levies under budget, well under $400,000 in terms of, cyclone impact and where we go to next. So understanding the bigger picture around development contributions and levies and productions, and sort of understanding where our development community is at as we move forward, preparing for growth and growth infrastructure. So I think that'd be helpful if we just more than the figure of $400,000 that is under, that we actually have a context around that and brought back to council.
So through you, Chair, and thanks for the question, Mayor Hazelhurst. I think a couple of things. It's going to come back pretty quickly. As you'll recall, this is a council that's been very focused on infrastructure. I think the Mayor calls herself the Queen of Infrastructure, where the council has made some decisions about some longer term investments in infrastructure that's going to cater for growth across residential and industrial and commercial. That's been the basis on which we've had engagement this very week with the development community about the proposed infrastructure plan and phasing, and also the associated proposal for consultation around changes to development contributions. So we will be having a conversation next month around that as part of your deliberations as council, based on that feedback. And it was a really good session with the developers. I think we got some really good feedback, and certainly the things that I'm aware we'll be bringing back to council in June to sort of consider is actually thinking about the development contributions potentially in some different ways around how we might sequence some of the work, how we might phase the development contributions, how we might create some opportunities to think about the current context that we're operating in some potentially ways of phasing the development contributions that kind of incentivises developers in the short to medium term. So I think we got some really, really great feedback from the development community, and all of those will be options that come back for a substantive conversation next month around the council table. And then I think going forward at the reporting level, the development contributions are inevitably always a bit hard to kind of predict in terms of how they might fall, but I think we have to find probably a way of getting a better sort of sense of, from the development community, some of the what's going on in the market and the intention. So I think it's at a couple of levels, but substantively, there will be a major conversation next month based on the infrastructure plans and the development contributions policies that you adopted for consultation, and that's happened over
Thank you.
this week.
I think it's, through you, Chair, I think it's really timely that we do look at the levers. We've talked about other levers in the past, about incentivisation and to encourage and support development for the future, and how our development community are going to be reacting to all the challenges that are, the fiscal challenges that are out there at the moment, and how we can, we're on this trajectory that we have been a district, experienced significant growth in the last 3 years, and how do we enable and keep that growth going, and rather than just looking at one aspect, and I think that'd be a very helpful piece of work, Gilda.
If I can, through you again, Chair, just quickly, say we've definitely got some great feedback, and we're thinking about some options. It is probably still premised at this stage off the pretty established principles of development contributions largely play for development, and I think that just so that I'm clear on expectations, some of the, because this is the age-old challenge with infrastructure about how's it funded and financed and who pays, and outside of it being the development contribution, it's either through general rates or targeted rates, and we're certainly not looking to propose next month that we make any of those calls around around ratepayers or targeted rates. I think we need to look at that strategically through the long-term plan. But we've had lots of great feedback from the developers, and taking on board their feedback, some ways that we think we can, within the development contributions phase, the work and how we phase the development contributions in a way that take account of the current sort of challenges in the market and the development environment, if that makes sense.
Councillor Hickey.
Kia ora. Just in regards to community housing, I note on page 23 that it's been extended out due to the flooding and things like that, in regards to developing a plan going forward. Will the plan include an asset management plan or potential rebuilds or quite in-depth understanding and specifically Swansea Village, and to name some? And I also note there's 183 on the waiting list still. What's currently happening with those whānau?
A waiting list that doesn't go down. It goes down by vacancies, which is usually from one form of event. So that becomes the challenge for us, is that we know we've got a huge demand in senior housing. We have 221 units of stock and almost a waiting list as big as that's growing. So that is the purpose of the review, and also as we get into, again, some of the advice to you around long-term asset management. What is the current condition of that asset and a forward view of that, and some of the choices and how you might think about that.
Thank you. Question, Councillor Shaw?
Really quickly, because I know we're running out of time. Just interested, I noted within this that it talked about the challenges of recruiting for Splash, and I know that we'll be having something coming forward to us in the future around Splash. I'm particularly interested in that future piece of work, if it can please inform us around the cost of the redeployment of staff, and what I mean around cost is not just remuneration, but then being pulled off other works as part of that bigger piece of work that we're going to look at, because that's obviously a high risk area for that particular entity. Thank you.
Anyone like to move the recommendation? Councillor Watkins, second by Councillor Sholem. Yep, all in favour? Aye. Thank you. Against? No? Happy to move, thank you. Okay, we are now going to move into public excluded. Could I have, are you making the reason why, please?
The reason why is that the report contains some confidential information that's not in the public domain, and is the basis for why we're recommending public excluded.
Councillor Sholem, happy to move. Second by Councillor Watkins. All in favour? Aye. Against? Moved. Thank you.